Hey, April Bowden here. I wanted to do a quick commentary on the latest sex allegations coming out of Hollywood or the celebrity world on Louis C.K., the famous stand-up comic. Louis, normally this stuff doesn't really interest me, but in the case of Louis it kind of did because of the fact that, you know, Louis is my all-time favorite stand-up comic. Louis is a prophet of our generation. He's a genius. He's said many, many profound things that have been life lessons. He's obviously a huge observer of humanity, but he's a man with a past of sexual misconduct around women. Now, what did he do? So 5 women have accused him of basically, without their consent, just masturbating in their presence. Now, I don't really understand that behavior. I don't understand where you're just talking to a woman on the phone and she's not talking dirty to you. She's not interesting in you know, being sexual in any way, being provocative in any way. And then you just start masturbating. And then there was a couple other cases where he did it in their presence, but they were just sitting there kind of fully clothed, just talking to him normal. And all of a sudden he just took off all of his clothes and started masturbating in their presence. Now, I will say that, you know, something like this actually happened to me when I was 20. I had been traveling through Europe and I was in the park and in Switzerland with a couple of my girlfriends, and this guy came down and he sat down in the park and he was wearing those runner shorts, you know, those 70s runner shorts where, you know, a man spreads his legs and you kind of like see everything. So he just stuck his hand in his shorts and he started masturbating. Now, I didn't really even notice because of the fact that, you know, I wasn't paying attention to him. But one of my girlfriends did, and she outed him and publicly, you know, started yelling at him. And so, of course, he was embarrassed and he got up and he walked away. Now, it's a weird story. I can't say I'm like traumatized by the event or anything like that, but it was definitely like odd, and I did look at the guy as a pervert. And so what Louis did, you know, I don't know what his relationship with these women were. They were fellow comics, and given the fact that he's got better fame and notoriety than they did, it may have felt from their perspective as if they were obligated not to really say anything or stop him, you know, because of the fact that he had some kind of level above them. I'm assuming that. I'm not sure that that was the case, you know, but it wouldn't surprise me if that was the case. So, and I can't say from their perspective that it wasn't traumatic because I don't know exactly what situation they were in. But the point that I'm trying to make is Louis, I never looked at as somebody that was a Hollywood guy. He seemed like kind of an outsider. I mean, from his business perspective, he did pretty much everything on his own. He lived in New York. He wasn't a Hollywood person. He went and he created this show that he's famous for, Louie, all on his own. He produces and edits it and he wrote it, and all of his stand-up, you know, written by himself. He's extremely creative, extremely brilliant, no doubt about it. But it seems as though all of these people that are being outed, now my theory on the fact that everything is being outed right now is the fact that Hollywood doesn't make any money anymore. So whoever is the financial backers of this, who may have had an invested interest in keeping these things under wraps, no longer does. It no longer is financially viable for them to try and cover these stories up because of the fact that Hollywood is not making any more profit. If you've looked at the numbers, you know, the movies are not raking anything in anymore. They're just, and they're still having to pay these big stars exorbitant fees just for their name and for their stardom. But they're not making any money. So they're just kind of letting these people, or even possibly behind their exposures. And that's my theory on what's going on. Now, the thing with Louis, the reason that it bothered me is because I really looked up to Louis. I thought of him as somebody who was a prophet of our times. And he said a lot of really profound things, showing that he had a lot of insight into humanity and empathy and, you know, permitting pain and things that were just on this level of a deeper. He wasn't just a comedian that was slipping on banana peels. He was somebody with a lot of thought, and he was very thought-provoking. He was also funny. He was self-deprecating. He never claimed to be, you know, a good person really, but he did seem like he tried to be a good person. So it's not, what he did was deplorable, but it's not on the level of like a Bill Cosby, who came out and said that he was, you know, this family man, and then he had one of the biggest family shows of all time, and then he was known for calling up other comics and chastising them for using curse words on stage, whereas he has a 50-year history of drugging and raping women. Okay, now another comic who's, you know, huge, probably one of the most famous people in Hollywood, Jim Carrey. I recently wrote about Jim Carrey in an article because Jim Carrey has a long history of, you know, being pretty ugly to his, I don't know that he's done anything on this level where it was unconsensual sex, but he's kind of a narcissist. He's known for being having pretty toxic relationships. His last relationship that was public, his girlfriend committed suicide. She was a lot younger than him, and she committed suicide using drugs that he had provided her, allegedly. And according to her family, he also was said to have given her 3 STDs, which he denied, but it was in a text message that she said that she had been diagnosed with 3 different STDs, and he was the only person she had been sexually active with. So, you know, and he also was said to have been providing to financially pay for her funeral, but he didn't, according to the family. So that's another example of a huge comic who got, you know, I mean, these are 3 of the most biggest money makers of all time. These guys are really, really rich, and they're really, really famous, and they are deviants in different ways. Now, what Bill Cosby did is full-blown psychopathy. Like, that's psychotic. Like, no doubt about it. What Louis did wasn't on that level, but the fact that he got as far as he did without this becoming public or without this coming out sooner, I think goes to show that it almost is a prerequisite for becoming a famous person. It seems in Hollywood. Now, let's give some other examples of people who were on that route but didn't quite get there. Martin Lawrence. If you remember in the 1990s, Martin Lawrence had he was one of the biggest stand-up comics. He had a sitcom, Martin, that was very popular. And then all of a sudden, he's seen, you know, in the middle of the road, acting crazy, carrying a gun. I think his clothes were off or something like that. And he was saying, they're going to kill me, they're going to kill me. Okay? And, you know, later it was said, oh, he was using drugs. He was not using drugs. It was found out that he wasn't. So that's one thing. So what happened to Martin? All right. Now, then, you know, fast forward a few years after that, Dave Chappelle. Dave Chappelle was on the rise. He was looking at millions of dollars, like $20 million from Comedy Central for his show, and he was very popular, okay? So he decides suddenly to uproot, leave the business, and go to Africa. and in secret. He didn't want to, I mean, he was spotted eventually, but he didn't want anybody to know. He kind of just uprooted and left. So, I mean, that's a person that looks like they're running from Satan, right? I mean, who leaves $20 million? I mean, he said, you know, I didn't exactly leave it, but I mean, you know, he did walk away from a lot of money and a lot of fame. And he, you know, and he did admit that, you know, it was somewhat of a breakdown. And when he gave his interview with the Inside the Actors Studio years later, and he was talking about the event, and he came into some of these people who, you know, are famous, and he mentioned Mariah Carey and her breakdown and people, and he's saying these are smart, talented, accomplished people who have full-blown breakdowns, not because, you know, they aren't, not because there's anything necessarily inherently crazy about them, because that's dismissive, but rather because there's something sick with their environment. So he was somebody who was aware of what was going on in the environment and said, fuck that. And he went to Africa. You know, he took an extreme measure to get away from it. Now, another, Cat Williams, he at one point, he wasn't as famous on television and movies, you know, but as a stand-up comic, at one point, he was the highest money-making stand-up comic of all time from doing live shows. and are you know, during that time period. I'm not gonna say of all time, I might be misquoting that, but he was definitely the highest moneymaker at one point. And then he goes on stage and he talks about Hollywood. He talks about being in the industry, going to meetings and watching people do drugs, or at parties and people are having sex openly. And, you know, and they're gay sex right in front of you. And he's saying these things is like, it's a shocker because he came into it not knowing any of this stuff was going on and then seeing it. Now, then later he's seen in all these videos acting crazy, you know, or being portrayed as crazy. He has a maid from his house accuse him of, calls CPS on him, and he gets his children taken away from him because he had weed and guns in the house, which he claimed he owned legally. So, I mean, and there's a lot of other stuff that went on with Cat. I don't know exactly if this man was framed or if he had a mental breakdown. But either way, it's very clear that, at least in the world of comedy, the sicker you are, the more money you make and the more famous you get. And you either choose to walk away and you run away from it like a bat out of hell, or you stay and you know, if you don't play their game, you get destroyed. Or if you expose the game. Cat Williams, I mean, his career is pretty much in the dirt now. But, I mean, he was definitely funny and famous, you know, so who knows what happened to him? You know, did he have a breakdown? You know, because the environment is so demented that then you start to become part of the environment, you know? So anyway, this is really disappointing about Louis. Everybody knows that I love Louis. I'm his biggest fan, but he's not above reproach. None of these people are above reproach, and this is why we don't worship celebrities. And this is why, you know, and again, I'm not putting it on the same plane as the psychotic behavior of Bill Cosby. He didn't rape anybody. He didn't do anything like that, but it was pretty creepy and gross, to say the least. And I don't know what his relationship with these women were and what kind of things that they felt that they needed to, you know, tolerate this behavior. So, you know, I mean, at least he's admitted it. It may destroy his career. You know, he is a comic. He may come back, but I don't know, but I'm not really invested in the outcome at this point. I think we just need to recognize this thing for what it is and just stop giving these people any of our attention. And at least, at the very least, just don't look up to them. Because he was one of the last that I actually did look up to, because I thought he was an outsider. I didn't think he was a Hollywood person. And business-wise, he was somewhat of an outsider. But, you know, he's not perfect. None of them are. So anyway, until next time, peace, truth, and love.